Dewey Davis Thompson. Dewey, I love how eclectic you are in your life. You're a volunteer, you're a web guru, you're the internet adept if anyone needs a website. Uh, you're a playwright, you're a lyricist, you're amazing. And what are you, I just want to know first off what you're working on now that excites you.
Well, at the moment, I'm working on a children's opera, which has been commissioned by Opera in the Ozarks. And it's about a rhinoceros who toured Europe in the 1700s. And it's actually about a long lost, very distant relative of mine whose name actually was Dewey Mont Vandermeer. And he took this rhinoceros on tour of all the great houses in the late 1700s. So I'm putting together a children's opera using children's nursery rhymes as sort of the basis of the music. So there's something familiar for the children to connect to. So, and I'm also, of course, working on my first book of memoirs with you. Sue's talked me into writing in this genre, and I was delighted to find out that it was very similar to the feature stories I used to write when I was a professional journalist in the 90s. And just dove right in and found there was lots of material to talk about. And so now I've got 3 or 4 dozen little stories that Susan and I are going through and editing and cleaning up for publication, hopefully later this year.
Yay. And that's been quite a journey. I loved it because when Dewey found out, I said, you should look at all the stories that you've written just in class. Just look at all those. And he went, oh my gosh, when I talked to him next. And he said, I have 1 book. I have 2 books. I probably have 3 memoir books in here. So that's been very exciting. And what about, okay, so you're a playwright, you've been a journalist, you've been a lyricist for operas. Is there one thing that has your heart more than the other, or does it depend on the project and the time? What do you?
No, I don't think so. I think I just enjoy writing, whether it's my journal or a newspaper story or a script. I really love reaching into the unknown of your brain and the ether and the muses and inspiration, and seeing what lands on the paper. It's a mysterious process for me, and I don't know really where it comes from. But Baum in the show I saw yesterday about L. Frank Baum, he said that the Oz books come to him, and the books he was struggling with, the adult books, were coming from him, and that's why he couldn't write them. And so yeah, so I don't think there's any particular thing I enjoy writing, but I just really enjoy the creation process, something out of nothing.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about the stories that you're going to read today. You've got 3 stories for us, correct?
I do. I brought in one story about living on the sailboat Sahai. When I was 12 years old, my family decided to move onto a sailboat full time. We spent a couple years traveling, and so I have a story about the Bahamas. And then another story about, well, when I was very young in 1972 in Michigan, and the sort of rose-colored glasses I think everyone was wearing in 1972. And then a third very, very short piece about, well, basically about having to put my mother-in-law into memory care.
Dewey Davis Thompson.
Great Isaac's Light. Dad woke my brother and I up in the middle of the night. Boys, I want you to get down on the floor and lay between the bunks. He collected his gun and went back on deck while my brother and I cowered on the floor. On either side of us, lazaret cupboards that doubled as seating were filled with canned goods, originally intended as provisions for our journey through the Bahamas. Now the tinned hams and cans of beans were supposed to protect Zach and I from flying bullets. We had arrived in the Bahamas only a few days earlier. Dad, Zach, my mother, a deckhand named Weston, and I all aboard a tiny 30-foot sailboat Sahai, having successfully crossed the dreaded Gulf Stream from Miami. sailed into Bimini, where our friends awaited. David Muffy on the Dream Dancer and their two kids, Christian and Sanji, had left the day before us, and they were already snugly anchored in the channel when we arrived midday. Anxious to see my young friends again, I dove overboard as soon as we were anchored and swam over to their boat. Technically, we had not yet cleared customs, so I was breaking international law already. But oblivious to that and to the large, dark shadow that followed me as I swam, I slipped through the clear water and red tape to be with my pals. Several months later, I asked my mom, "Did you hear there's a 20-foot hammerhead shark that patrols Bimini?" Then she told me about the giant shadow that had followed me across the bay. "Why didn't you tell me there was a shark behind me?" I asked her. "Because I wanted you to continue swimming normally." Good answer. Bahamas, it seems, was intent on trying to find ways to kill me. On our last day of trekking along the islands that drip along the coastal shelf, I got lost, mostly on purpose, to get away from bickering parents and the unkindly deckhand, and found myself wearing nothing but a Speedo for an entire day on a desert island. My family was rowing ashore at sunset with a search party when I finally found my way back to the bay with our boat. My nose burned completely raw. I had a new appreciation for our tiny vessel and the relative safety it offered. But I was not feeling very safe that night, cowering on the floor with my brother as my father fretted on deck. We were in a place called Great Isaac's Light, a very remote and dramatic location, even for the Bahamas. At the northernmost part of the shallow seas of the Great Bahama Bank, the lighthouse is at the edge of a deep section of water, the other side of which is another shallow bank with Freeport and the northern Bahama Islands. Our plan was to go to Freeport early the next day. According to Atlas Obscura, the lighthouse at Great Isaac's was erected in 1850s to protect merchant ships from disappearing in the Bermuda Triangle. The 152-foot tall Great Isaac Lighthouse has become more of a participant in the area's mysteries than a protector. The key itself is one giant coral head, a colony of genetically identical coral polyps, rising a few feet out of the area's shallow, dangerous reefs. Razor-sharp terrain makes the land inhospitable and difficult to traverse. For over a century, the barren island was occupied by lighthouse keepers, but on August 4th, 1969, it was discovered that the caretakers had gone missing. Their bodies were never found, and while it's anyone's guess as to what may have happened, a hurricane that passed through a few days prior is thought to be the likeliest culprit. After their disappearance, the Great Isaac Light was automated, shining a white beam every 15 seconds to sailors up to 23 nautical miles away. The rest of the compound's buildings have been left to crumble. Adding to the island's macabre history, 19th century lore has it that a ship wrecked at the Great Isaac's Key, killing everyone aboard except for one young infant. Locals claim that the infant's mother, known as the Gray Lady, can still be seen roaming the island, her wails of sorrow heard on full moons. I never saw the Gray Lady, but Muffy was a nudist and a snorkeler. She was a nude snorkeler. And she was doing the frog kick in front of my astonished 13-year-old self, wearing a face mask that makes everything look 25% bigger and 25% closer. Now, that's an image that stays in your mind forever, said my mom years later. Muffy swam to shore while we kids continued to snorkel. She found a circle of conch shells left by local fishermen all over the islands and did nude yoga in the center of the shells. I guess after the snorkeling, the nude yoga was less distressing. We were often nude on the boat, but that was just family. Muffy's comfort with public pubes was something new to me. We traveled in a convoy because in the 1980s, the Bahamas were at the center of drug trafficking. Cocaine came in from South America and was ferried or flown over to Miami in small planes, boats, whatever. A helpless little sailboat all alone was an easy target for pirates who would steal the boat, feed the crew to the sharks, and use the boat to run drugs before scuttling it at sea. At one port, we discovered the Bahamas Customs had been tracking our entire trip closely because we had a Labrador retriever. They were used to retrieve square groupers or floating deliveries of dope. Innocent as we were, we still looked guilty. But if we seemed sketchy to the Bahamas were sketchy looking to us. Everywhere we went was creepy and weird, said Mom. That night, Mom made the infamous chicken cacciatore dinner that we all loved. But this time, as she added carrots and potatoes to the chicken, she also put in too much jalapeno juice. She swore it was the usual amount, but the toxic result was too hot for us boys, too hot even for my father with his Teflon tongue. We threw it overboard, and as the rainbow sheen on the surface spread away, we could see the chunks of potato and chicken slowly fall to the ocean floor, clear as can be in the warm, shallow water. At every level, a new group of fish would swim up, try to take a bite, and swim away in terror. Around sunset, another boat joined us, quite unexpectedly. A power boat, ostensibly a fishing boat, but with a lot of curious garbage cans on deck, sailed into the bay and anchored a few hundred meters away. What had been a mirthful stop before a dangerous crossing now became a more threatening situation. My parents and Dave and Muffy kept a wary eye on the supposed fishermen, growing increasingly alarmed as the sun went down, and the fishermen did not. They stayed up drinking and playing cards as much as we could tell. Finally, it was midnight. And though the kids were snug in their quarter berths, the adults were still keeping an eye on the night owl fishermen. By now, my folks had been kept up much later than they had wanted. But who can go to sleep with a possible predator in sight? At midnight, or so I understand, another boat arrived. That is when we panicked. Get on the floor, kids. Dad and Dave had not anticipated this turn of events. The first instinct was to protect ourselves. Guns, check. Cowering, check, check. But the second instinct was to run. We didn't want to use the marine radio to signal our intent to Dave, but when we turned on the engines, I guess he got the idea. We pulled anchor and headed out into the dark, deep seas of the Northwest Providence Channel. The uncertainty of an unplanned departure, an open ocean, unknown tides and currents seemed preferable to whatever fate might await at Great Isaac's Light.
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you, Dewey. Oh, harrowing.
And then I have another picture to share with you. This next piece is called Space Age Lies in 1972. And there's me. Everything started going to hell after 1972. Some folks want to blame the free love and rock and roll that gushed out of the 60s. Others will blame the globalization of manufacture and the slow, persistent chipping away at the social safety nets. But no matter what side of the sad, pathetic, unnecessary, artificial divide that separates the politically minded, nearly everyone agrees that once upon a time, there was a magic America, a golden age of prosperity and freedom. The lost age of greatness those deplorable maggots yearn to return to. That was the happy reality into which I came to cognizance. Free love and Whitey on the moon. Bras were burning, sexism was over, and women won. Nixon was resigning, corruption was defeated thanks to the heroic press. And even the Vietnam War was being won by protesters. Peace and justice had prevailed in America. As if to punctuate the message, in 1972, my own family was preparing to set off on a mission to Africa to spread health and knowledge with the Peace Corps. Festooned with rust-colored bell-bottoms and queasy green shag, 1972 embraced all the colors of television. The space age had come to fruition, albeit sans flying cars, just as scripted by Madison Avenue in Hollywood. Sleek lines and fast travel. Cars looked and flew like rocket ships. And to top it all off, everyone was so rich and generous. For example, my grandpa Numerador had a new car every week. Well, a different car, actually. His brother-in-law, which makes it my grandmother's brother, but the story never went that way, owned a used car lot. So Mr. Numerador had his pick of rocket ships. Tulip season was upon the Dutch replica village in Holland, Michigan, when I turned 4 years old. To celebrate the spring, a parade of costumed dancers clogged and kicked their wooden-clad feet fore and aft. Colorful beds of flowers spread out below the spinning windmills. A sea of tulips and reminders from my grandmother of our own family's lingering Dutch customs. My favorite, oeliekoeken, a fried sugar donut served on New Year's Eve. Jenny Veda Numerador, née Medema, and her husband, John Henry Numerador, were both second-generation Americans. Their grandparents were all from the Netherlands. Hollanders landed on the shore of Lake Michigan in the 1880s. But by my generation, all that remained of the culture was a few treasured recipes. Windmill cookies. Really, the most important thing about Mimi when I was 4 was the windmill cookies. Of course, she was a stern Dutch Christian Reformed woman with lockstep child management policies. And Mimi had this horrifying, huge braided bun, larger than the rest of her entire head. And that bun mysteriously came right off at night and was stored in a hat box on the top shelf of her closet. That was very unsettling, of course. But then there were windmill cookies. So, just like any other innocent, ignorant tourists dressed in layers for Michigan in springtime, we climbed the twisting stairs inside the replica windmill and ate waffles. Tulips came out through the melting snow, and so I have dozens of photos of my bundled family in the tulip greenhouses later that day. There's Grandpa with 2 handfuls of tulips wrapped in newspapers. It's mini-me holding a pot of tulips in my green jeans with the fly down. And although tulips are notoriously scentless, here's Mimi with her nose deep in a yellow Tulipa sylvestris as the sun begins to set. Grandfather's convertible spaceship jetted us to a parking lot on the edge of the Grand River. Once the car stopped, I could sit up on the back of the back seat, practically on the trunk, to better see across the river. There, on the aptly named Dewey Hill, was the Grand Haven musical fountains. Water fountains and lights coordinated to uplifting, familiar music as they explode across the sky. Liquid fireworks. Man, 1972 really was golden. Ram Dass and Alan Watts, ultra left-wing role models, call it the era of exploration and freedom that grew out of the summer of love. Right-wing writer Thomas Piketty, in the overpriced Capital in the 21st Century, referenced 30 magical post-war years the French call Trente Glorieuses. Well, they don't call it that, but I can't speak French. So really, things did look sunny in 72. It wasn't just me, but it was a facade, of course, as fake as Mimi's bun. Once the closet door closed on the hat box, things happened that I was just too young to see. My grandparents fought with ferocity. He returned from the war scarred and was never healed from whatever horrors he saw. She suffered mental illness to a shocking extent. He found another woman. In 1972, the facade was thin, but effective.
Oh, nice job, Dewey. Beautiful.
And here's the third one. I don't think it has a title. The Thanksgiving salmon, maybe. She's getting worse. I told you that. You told me she hurt her wrist. I told you she fell off the sofa and broke her wrist. Off the sofa? Yeah. I've basically lost my mother. I'm so sorry. And After consideration, I realized that I can finally give up. After 35 years of doing my best to be on my best behavior, the point is now moot. I met Jeannie, my mother-in-law, at Thanksgiving dinner when Steve and I had just started cohabiting in college. Desperate to make a good impression, I gushed at the salmon she cooked that year for Steve, who'd given up fowl on his way to full veganism. But that year it was salmon, and I gushed. Oh, the color is so bright, perfect for the Thanksgiving table. And the meat is just a tiny bit gamey, just like turkey is to chicken. Oh, so perfect. My gusher worked. And for 7 years, she dutifully made me a Thanksgiving salmon, long after Steve gave up all flesh. After more than a half decade of taking home Tupperware full of turkey and salmon, I told Steve it was time to confess to his mother, I hate salmon. Even when the salmon was safely in the past, I still tried to impress. A Mesoamerican archaeologist, she was sure to take note of my growing expertise in Mayan epigraphy. Look at these glyphs. Later, when Mike was on the scene, it almost seemed like a competition. Who could be the best husband to Steve? It would never be okay if Mikey was the favorite son-in-law. But now, it's all moot. Jeannie does not even know which son I am, son-in-law, son-outlaw, or even her own son. So there's no point in trying to impress her. It's like trying to swim up a waterfall, pointless and exhausting. And so I'm left here, holding my empty Tupperware of salmon out to an unknowing gaze, not knowing if I ever succeeded or even if it matters anymore.
Thank you, Dewey. Beautiful work. Very lovely.